Welcome to the Security Weekly News wrap-up for the week of 8 March 2020, Black Plague edition. Biting other passengers on EU flights. Everyone is getting to telecommute. NSO argues with Facebook in court about phone bugging, the return of Phyto, and more on this episode of Security Weekly News wrap-up.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals.
We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
It's the show that keeps you up to date on the latest security news twice a week, your trusted source for accurate security information and expert analysis. It's time for Security Weekly News. Make sure your team is prepared to fight off the latest cybersecurity threat. IT Pro TV is the resource to keep you and your IT team skills up to date. You can stream IT Pro TV courses live and on demand, so there's no need to send staff to off-site training. Team subscriptions include Pro Portal, so managers have full control over your team's training schedule. Go to itpro.tv/hack-naked and use the code HN30 to try it free for 7 days and receive 30% off your monthly membership. As technology continues to evolve and expand, so have the countless ways our critical systems can be put in jeopardy. Ransomware attacks, misconfiguration, user error, and malicious threat actors, to name a few. As IT infrastructures continue to grow and diversify, how do you ensure stable security? Core Security, a help systems company, provides an analytics-driven, layered approach to security with a portfolio that enables both proactive and reactive responses. With Core Security, you can reduce risk by limiting access, detect upcoming and active threats, test for security weaknesses, and efficiently monitor data for actionable insights. To learn more, visit securityweekly.com/core security.
Hi, I'm Doug White, your host, and welcome to the Security Weekly News wrap-up show. In the age of cancellations, I'm not going to do cancellation announcements, but it is the age of cancellation. First, let's wrap up all the show topics for the week because we're not canceled because we're already online. On Application Security Weekly number 98, Mike, John, and Matt had an interview with Dan Pettit, who's an InfoSec World speaker. And the topic of this segment was a review of Dan's upcoming two-day workshop at InfoSec World, which is at the end of the month. And that is on DevSecOps. Dan is conducting a deep survey into all things DevSecOps in Orlando. So if you're going to InfoSec World, you should definitely check the segment out and see if it's something you want to sign up for, because it probably is. On Business Security Weekly number 164, Matt, Jason, and Paul were breaking down all the categories. I thought that was that's an objective. All the categories in information security, which they did a good job of it. In addition, the topic of CISOs ready to move and how CISOs manage stress and more about that kind of administrative topic. I actually picked up a news story from there about CISOs. Basically, we'll talk about it in a minute, but CISOs may move pretty quickly, and pretty much they're all wanting to move, apparently. So we'll talk about those on the news segment. On Enterprise Security Weekly number 174, Matt and Paul talked about, the news. CrowdStrike Falcon, Sentinel-1, ForcePoint in partnership with AWS, and a whole bunch more. In the second segment, they had two pre-recorded interviews with Mike Nichols, who's always great, of Elastic, and Todd Beardsley of Rapid7, both longtime friends of Security Weekly that you've probably seen on various shows before, so they're always worth tuning into. They finished this one up with two more pre-recorded interviews of Dan DeCloss of PlexTrack and Corey Tuin of Gravwell. All those segments were recorded at RSA, so that was more of the content that came back from San Francisco. On Security Weekly News number 16, James Adams joined me. He's from Core Security, and he was when we were talking about pen testing. So we had a pretty good time talking about that matter, some different aspects of that. It was definitely worth checking out the interview with James Adams on Security Weekly News from Tuesday. On Security and Compliance Weekly number 19, Jeff, Matt, and Scott interviewed Win I practiced this. Schwartau. I know who this guy is, but I practice his name, I swear, who has been working in security since 1983. Vin is the originator of the term electronic Pearl Harbor. That came out of some congressional testimony he was doing way back. but he can prove it. And he has a new book out called Analog Network Security. So really interesting to always hear from him and when he's on the show. Finally, on Paul's Security Weekly number 643, Paul, Larry, Jeff, and Lee did an interview with Dorit Naperstik about connected device security, and in particular, we're talking about flash memory and security devices, which was quite interesting. Dorit is the director of R&D at Nanolock, so that was a very cool interview and a discussion that you probably do want to check out. Actually, when do you not want to check out the stuff on Security Weekly anyway? But in the second segment, Bianca Lewis was the guest, and this one you definitely, you can't miss it. Bianca is a 13-year-old hacker, which, I mean, like, really? And an international speaker. And her Vita at 13 is better than mine, so you probably should just go ahead and read it on the wiki because it was really long and impressive. The main focus was discussion about girls who hack and the Secure Open Vote initiative. But Bianca had gotten a lot of name recognition, if you don't recall, at DEF CON 26 because she was the 13-year-old who hacked the voting reporting system at DEF CON 26. So that one, you definitely want to watch that one. Another interview with always awesome Gabriel Gumbs from Spirion, focused on protecting data on employee-owned PCs, a very relevant topic right now. I have another news story related to that. Always fun time hanging out with Gabe. The last time I got to be on the show with him was at DEF CON last year. We did a segment with him, and he's always a lot of fun. My favorite thread of the week remained misinformation. I didn't change it because COVID-19 has just continually demonstrated the importance of finding reliable and trustworthy information sources and just how fragile infrastructure and people's psyches can be in the face of adversity. Pretty much everyone is thrashing. I did see a news story this week about a lot of young people were using Instagram as their primary source of information. Okay. But so please don't listen to witch doctors, talk show hosts, and hedge wizards about COVID-19. Much better to go find reliable sources like the CDC or WHO. Enough said about that. And then the top news from all the shows and anything new that came along this week. So CISOs who leave after 2 years may not finish what they start. Apparently, 2.1 years was the average time in the job for most CISOs before they move on. And this news article was talking about how that probably wasn't enough time to actually enact any kind of real change in the organization. So why do they leave? So there was an interesting article about how quickly CISOs come and go at most organizations. But apparently the reason they leave is the job market. So a separate article from Computer Weekly basically said, I mean, get this, 85% of senior professionals are actively looking to move or would move if something better comes along. Now, I didn't go read the actual survey questions to see if that was, if they just basically said, hey, if a great job came along, would you take it? But apparently, 85% of the people surveyed actually said they would move if something better came along. And only 7% of United States CISOs were not actively looking for work. So that's I mean, I know that's a tough job. I really do. But maybe it's time for me to put on a tie and become a CISO. I mean, so it's like, I don't know. But, and if you're the CISO of Whisper, well, you're probably actively seeking right now, since Whisper, a secret sharing app whose tagline was the safest place on the internet, had some problems. But basically what Whisper is it's an app that lets mostly really young users share their personal secrets with each other using an avatar, which I said this on Tuesday, but I have a real, like, really? Why would you want to do this? I don't know if it's like narcissism or what, that you want to go out and say, I'm going to put a secret up, I won't even try to make one up because I'll get in all kinds of trouble if I do. But basically, in an anonymous, pseudo-anonymous fashion, so all this information is stored in an open database which was not password protected, that was then exposed to the internet, which allowed people to access the secrets, the ages of the people who revealed the secrets, and their locations. Now, this app was already in hot water for location tracking earlier in the year, and during this latest finding, it was also found that they have this thing on there called the Predator Likelihood Score, which I was like, if your site needs a predator, that's pretty awful. But apparently 9,000 users on Whisper had scored a perfect 100% on the predator meter. So, of course, you got children revealing secrets. You got child predators. I mean, imagine that. In this study, over 1.3 million users who listed their age were actually listed as being 15. So I'm not going there. Nope. But anyway, a big problem there. Google Chrome 80 was released in February and had a new approach using AES 256 to secure passwords, cookies, and other information, replacing the old DPAPI model. They didn't completely replace it, though. I'll mention in a minute. But almost immediately, sites, particularly Russian malware sites, began advertising, not just putting up things, but they were actually advertising, now all new and improved, that they could go in and get around this. So Ravid Laib from Kila said that Chrome really basically still relies on DPAPI, but added a new layer by encrypting with this AES 256. And they basically encrypt the key, or they encrypt using AES and then encrypt the key using DPAPI, which means that you can still just go right around it. Marketing on the malware sites wasted no time in advertising that you could bypass this feature, and they were offering all sorts of discounts for upgrades to new malware versions that would get around this at all new crazy low malware prices. So, it's the bargain basement malware store where you can go where prices are always insane. Phyto. Phyto is a first identity online, which most of us are familiar with to some degree. This is an open source approach to getting rid of passwords. It was developed by the Phyto Alliance, but it's back in the news. So the movement continues to push to get rid of passwords completely and replace them with some new approach. Basically, the approach is standardization of the use of hardware devices of some sort. So they want to standardize all those devices, whether it's phones or it's YubiKeys or whatever, into a security key, which could be used instead of a password being the primary restriction to your account. It's a great idea, and I wish it would work, and I hope it will work, but I am very worried about how rapidly we'll be able to move down that road towards replacing operating systems and applications that rely on old-fashioned legacy protocols using a password in order to authenticate, because it's not just as simple as saying, I'm going to slap this in there and everything's going to be fine. In fact, Microsoft, a related sort of story to this, reported that significant numbers of enterprise accounts at Microsoft are broken into every month. The percentage was like 0.5%, which doesn't sound like much, but when you multiply that times the number of enterprise accounts at Microsoft, it starts to become an actual number. The primary approach for these break-ins was either credential stuffing, password spraying, some mechanism of that, brute forcing, you name it. And most of these accounts that were compromised did not use multi-factor authentication, and so essentially the passwords were easily compromised. Certainly with credential stuffing that we see all the time, and then that's just one of the main vectors of attack right now. And because people use the same password and username combo on every site they use, credential stuffing is an awfully easy way to get into various and sundry things. But a lot of these attacks also leveraged legacy authentication protocols. So these were things being sent in the clear, which enabled then password credential theft and so forth. They did what a lot of us would like to do and maybe have done in our organizations, and they disabled and or blocked access to things like POP, IMAP, SMTP, and so forth. And this basically resulted in, they were testing it, but they actually were testing it live. It resulted in a one-day outage for their sales force due to so many tools in that application that the sales teams use, relying so heavily on these legacy protocols. I think the point of these two stories is that while Phyto may be a great approach, and I think that it is, and I want it desperately to work, it may be very difficult to change the basic nature of authentication quickly, since getting people to give up legacy stuff is quite difficult in my personal experience. It's like Second Amendment difficult. I mean, I'm going to give up my legacy protocols when you pry them from my cold, dead fingers. Yeah, kind of thing. I mean, that's been the reaction I got. Israeli spy firm NSO Group, maker of the spyware Pegasus. That's not really spyware. That's not a good term for it. The spying application Pegasus said that Facebook lied and disregarded international law in a court case between them and Facebook in California. Apparently, NSO Group did not appear at the trial but sent in a statement. Facebook filed a suit against NSO claiming that NSO used WhatsApp, which is owned by Facebook, to conduct cyber espionage on 1,400 journalists, diplomats, dissidents, and others worldwide. NSO makes that Pegasus product, which apparently allows you, according to the information, I have never used Pegasus, so I don't know, but apparently you can switch on the cell phone camera and the microphone, exfiltrate data from the cell phone, as well as recording using the camera and mic. And so basically you've eliminated the need for pesky old-fashioned bugs. I did put a link in the wiki to some pesky old-fashioned bugs, which are actually current, if you would rather buy those, or you could certainly go check out Pegasus. I reported earlier this year on Travelex being down from ransomware. They got attacked on New Year's Eve. Travelex, if you're not familiar with it, is the company that does those little kiosks in airports where you trade in your euros for dollars and your dollars for yuans and on and on and on. You can also purchase cards that you can get foreign currency and so forth. They were down for a long time. And that's any outage is a long time when your business is allowing people to walk up to a kiosk or a machine and get foreign currency when they need it. Apparently, the attack ended up costing around $30 million US for the company, and the share price, wait for it, plunged 80% yesterday. From around 45, and this was traded on a British exchange, it was like 45 pounds down to about 4.5 pounds per share. Now, pretty much everything did some pretty horrible gyrations yesterday, but this one really took a giant nosedive. Finabler, who's the owner of Travelex, is apparently near to collapse, which I took to mean bankruptcy, and they blamed the ransomware attack and the coronavirus threat combined for the plunge of its stock price on Thursday. So, you know, like I say, don't look at your portfolio today unless you want to have a really bad morning. The United States government is about to order thousands of federal employees to telework, which that's how they described it. I usually call it telecommute, but full-time. This may be a massive change in both the level of security and support that's needed for the U.S. government. It's not clear if the U.S. government is prepared for the challenges of this sudden change. These are mostly employees who have never been allowed to telecommute because they deal with sensitive information and or government agencies, and suddenly they're telling them, just stay home and use your PC that you normally do whatever you normally do with your PC. We won't insult anybody. Likewise, as universities, and if you're at a university or know someone at a university, you probably know someone whose university has said everything will now be online. I don't know that these universities are going to be ready to support and secure a massive increase in online presence as all of the faculty, whereas in the past maybe a small percentage of the faculty were online and a small percentage of coursework was online. All of a sudden they're saying our entire organization will be online. And they're telling faculty to work on their classes from home. The students are all been sent home. Secondary schools may also join this mix. We're seeing more and more public and private K-12 schools canceling and closing, saying the exact same thing. I did put up a couple of reference articles there related to this that you may want to check out. I think it's going to be a huge issue in the cybersecurity community as we go forward in the time of plague. In Singapore, a new requirement is related to the same thing. A new requirement will label home routers and SOHO devices with a sticker if they meet the new stringent requirements, which have not been fully specified yet. But the requirements do so far include not being able to have default passwords on the device, mandatory strong passwords, and other basic security hygiene measures, which basically reasserts all these home pieces of equipment probably aren't secure. Nobody is labeling these things at this time. But this may be the beginning of an increased focus on the security of these SOHO type devices as we see all these workers and students and everybody else heading home to use their SOHO devices now instead of using more secure devices wherever they were working and so forth. In the Secure and Trusted Communications Network Act, which was signed on Thursday by President Trump, mandates that subsidies be eliminated for companies, particularly telcos, subsidies be eliminated for companies supplying telcos that were deemed a national security threat. That includes Huawei and ZTE and others. This really affects rural telcos because they pretty much are the typical recipient of the $1 billion or so a year that is awarded for equipment. Huawei, of course, doesn't like this and has said it was outrageous and it was wrong. But the House and the Senate of the United States approved this bill unanimously. So we'll see. The bill does mandate that the FCC will establish a program to assist small providers with the cost of removing the now banned equipment. ShmooCon 2020 talks are up on YouTube if you missed them. I put a link to that in the wiki if you'd like to check out some of those cool ShmooCon talks from there. And finally, apparently, you can no longer claim compensation under the EU delayed flight rules if the delay was caused by someone biting passengers and assaulting the flight crew. I'm not making this up. There's a link to it. If you're unaware, and a lot of us do fly to the EU and on EU airlines regularly. If you're unaware, flights originating in the EU or on EU carriers which are delayed or canceled may entitle you to compensation. I got the total value of a flight back when my flight from Paris was canceled on United Airlines a couple of years ago. I put in a request, and I actually got the full value of my flight. It was like, wow, it was like 800 euros or something. But it wasn't due to biting or me biting anyone or anyone being bitten. But according to a court in Europe, if this was due to biting and or attacking the flight crew, no such luck. And that's a news wrap-up for the week of 8 March 2020. I'm Doug White from Roger Williams University. See you next week with more security news and shows.